I'm ready to talk about Jen's wedding. There is so much going on in tiny spaces. There's two running themes that I saw. We're going to talk about it. But first, hey, my name is Shauna A. I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor supervisor, and I work with therapists and helping professionals to help them scale beyond their practices, or I like to say beyond the couch. From time to time, I like to give commentary on the Shawnaverse, and today I'm giving commentary on Jennifer's wedding. Let's get into it. So, I've got my notes. It's 7 pages. And there's a couple of things that was happening in this episode. I will admit it took me some time to really sink in to the episode because I was just expecting so much more drama. This is not a fault of Shauna. This is really the fault of my own expectations of the cringe-worthy drama. I think we've gotten a full year and change of Barb and her behaviors. And because we've gotten so much of Barb at her worst, at her best, of these behaviors, that I expect for it to be top notch bad every time. And really, what we saw here is a playing of the patterns. So let's talk about the couple of things that I saw in this episode, and we'll go from there. Obviously, the running theme is tiny spaces, and I'll explain more about that. But note in the wedding, they said teeny tiny quite a bit, or they've implied the idea of feeling small. Jennifer says feeling small a lot when it comes to her discussions with Barb. She tells Barb from time to time that she makes her feel small, she makes her feel dumb. And Barb does that almost seemingly on purpose. But there's other characters who call to Barb making people feel small. Frank says it in this episode, and I will get to that in a little bit. But let's first start off with the countdown. So, at the beginning of the episode, we see Jen and Greg together. We kind of talked a little bit about this because we got this episode in a couple of different ways. So, first, we got Jen sharing with Greg, and then we got Jen's bachelorette party, and then we came back and we got more. So Jen and Greg talking about where Jen is at, and her saying one of my favorite things that she said that seemed really insightful for her. One, this is advice that came from Shauna. So she says she's going to practice focusing on not nitpicking certain things. She knows the wedding is not going to be perfect. There's certain things that she is willing to let go, and there's certain things that she's adamant about. She demonstrates this with Greg when Greg's like, okay, so I'll tell the photographer this. And she's like, no, I want this, but I'm not going to nitpick things like flowers or something like that. So she is directly so she talked about this with Shauna, right? Shauna said, you're just going to have to accept that Barb is going to be Barb. And we see her talking about this some more of really from the place of, I accept that this wedding is not going to be perfect. So there's some acceptance that is happening here. And then we hear Jen say something that I thought was really cool. She said, sometimes I didn't know how I felt. It was hard to access it. And sometimes when people have to shrink themselves and make their feelings really small so another person takes up all of the air in the room or has much bigger feelings, then you have a hard time figuring out what it is that you're feeling because you've been practicing stuffing them down and putting them away for so long. So for Jen in her relationship, one of the things that she's learned how to do is access her own feelings and be able to call out when she's feeling a certain way or noticing when she's feeling a certain way. She talked about her tactless honesty in this moment as a defense mechanism. And I think this cycles around because when she's talking to Shauna about Shauna's wedding dress, and she was like, I imagined your wedding dress like this, or I don't remember your wedding dress, which is also something that people with trauma sometimes experience is not really remembering things. But Jen was able to call, like, oh, because I didn't access those feelings that also changed my perspective. So she had a certain perspective of Shauna, which wasn't necessarily the case, but she's able to recognize that in this episode. I just really, really love how she recognizes that her honesty was really a way to push away people. And it was really a way of her attempting to protect herself, especially for growing up in a situation where she had little protection and an adult who was emotionally abusive towards her. The teeth whitening strips I knew was going to be a problem because we kept seeing them over and over again. Quick tip for anybody who is getting married: don't do alterations to self the week of. Give some space for corrections to be made because you just don't want to go into your own wedding with a hot head, or at least give yourself to expect some changes. And of course, I know there's always going to be some people that would be like, on the day of my wedding I cut off all my hair. Good for you. For those of you who cannot handle the anxiety of something going wrong and not having much to fix it, and then you're in a crisis, do your alterations to self a couple of weeks before. Give yourself some time to whitening your teeth. They're not going to turn yellow in a week. Give yourself some time to make some mistakes or for some things to go down so that you're not actively stressed. Now, the next part, we see Frank and Barb, and we learn some things. We learn that Frank is sleeping in the den. And in this conversation, they are no longer connecting. Frank is talking, but he's ignoring when she's passive aggressive. He's answering when he feels like it. It's very interesting. She asks him, "Did you pick up a new hobby that I'm not supposed to know about?" And he doesn't respond to that. Then she asks him, "Did you eat?" And he says, "Yes, I ate breakfast and I left you an egg in the fridge." He doesn't really give direct responses to her passive aggression. And there's moments where he shuts her down. When she asked about the gift, and he said, "I'm working on a gift for the kids." And she said, "Oh, something about the money. Like, oh, haven't you done enough?" is what she asked him. And he said, "What, Barb? Are you afraid I'm going to spend all the money and there'll be none left for you?" And she said, "I didn't say that." And he said, "No, you didn't." And I think this is also a thing that Barb does, is she implies things that give her plausible deniability. We see her questioning the money a lot. She questions Frank on, how much money he's given to the wedding. And even during Chicky's birthday, she talks a little bit about money. "You want me to spend all my time and my money?" And so I think this is something that Barb seems to hyper focus on. But when Barb does something like this and someone pushes back, she just is like, "Well, I didn't say that," but she implied it. This is a part of her passive aggressive behavior. Next, Frank is like, "I'm not going to fight with you," right? And so he's like, "I'm going for a walk," which is his default defense mechanism. Barb asks if she can go on the walk, and he said no. I'm like, "No, thank you." And I think part of that is because Frank is attempting to truly distance himself with Barb. He's no longer attempting to connect with her. He is living in his truth and who he is. And we see that also play out throughout the episode. What I really love about this episode is that we see Jen handling Shauna not going to the wedding better than what I expected. I expected for Jen to be really upset that John and Shauna weren't going, but she wasn't. She was in a place of acceptance and she was like, "I understand, and that's fine." And the cool thing is, not only was she not as upset as I was expecting, and she just kind of was like rolling with the punches, but she also was able to increase the relationship that she had with Shauna. Like, you further see a solidification between the two of them. We really start to see a sisterly bond between the two of them, which is something that Shauna has always wanted. We know that for Shauna, that family is important to her. And I think maybe this is important to Jen as well, of having that connection and really expanding out what her family looks like. Now, Barb decided that she wasn't going to be at home and herself. And then we see the reintroduction of Nora, everybody's favorite aunt or great aunt, who is wowzers make yowzers. What's really interesting is Nora seems to be the one character who can call Barb out on her stuff. She's also the character that can make Barb tap into a side of herself Maybe it's the person that she always wanted to be or doing the things that she always wanted to do. We also see that Nora is a deeply selfish character. So she really has no regards for anybody else outside of what is motivating to her, outside of what she really wants for herself. So it doesn't affect her when Barb kind of dishes out these remarks. Nora kind of just takes in and is just like, so what? The thing about it is what Nora is saying to Barb made a lot of sense. Like she said, get over yourself. And then she said, when Barb was like, you have to take a responsibility and or accountability for your actions. And Nora kind of holds her feet to the fire where she said, our actions. We did that. That wasn't me on my own. You participated in it. And Barb says, well, I'm the one that's dealing with the consequences. And that's the thing about Nora is she does not deal with Barb's consequences. She doesn't deal with anybody. She doesn't deal with any of the consequences of any situation. So she can kind of move on and live freely. And Barb does end up holding the mess after she's made the mess because she wants everybody else to be accountable, but she refuses to be accountable. And Nora kind of calls that out for Barb. Nora says, you want the attention. You can see that Barb was excited that Nora was there and that Nora was talking to her. She smiled a little bit. And then Nora says, we caused the harm in that Thanksgiving episode. But then she starts to say things to Barb like, you have to live your life. You can choose the grumpy or you can choose the fun. And again, I think for Barb and Nora, fun is at other people's expenses because this is not just any other day. This is 2 days before the wedding, right? So there are things that she could be doing. And she later brings up, I've been excluded, but she won't take the responsibility for recognizing that that exclusion is her own fault. She excluded herself in the decisions that she made, but she won't accept that responsibility. Now, going past the vasectomy appointment, there is something that happens here that I think highlights this episode as a whole. So it starts with Dee Dee being the door handler. Dee Dee is officially the person that is answering that door. And Frank's at the door. And John says it's okay, let him in. We see John and Frank have this conversation. I'm going to tell you, I was really proud of Frank powering through. So John is being super short with him, he's being kind of dismissive. And Frank is like, no, I have a point. I have a reason I'm here. And so he powers through all of that to get to this conversation about John. So we can see that John is a person who also has a history of trauma. It wasn't just that Barb was yelling at him, Barb was also hitting him. She was physically harming him. And he says something where we learn that Frank was neither present for John or Jen. And that put John in a position to also have to be a defender of Jen, to also have to support Jen through when their mom was being their mom. I think this is really important because we see John and Jen handle their trauma in very different ways. We see Jen yearning for the acceptance of her mother, whereas John just decided that he's no longer going to take it. But I think that John does a really good job of holding Frank's feet to the fire. He reiterates again why he's so frustrated and why he's so upset with Frank. And it has everything to do with Frank's lack of presence. But in this instance, Frank acknowledges that. And he said, there's a price for staying away. Don't let her shrink your world. And I thought that was so powerful. Franks recognizes for his own self preservation, he let Barb shrink his world. He let his kids grow up and he wasn't present in their growth. And so, because he let Barb shrink his world, he doesn't always know how to truly access it and how to truly show up and be present for them because now they're grown and one is actively rejecting them. The other one is calling him in and will allow for him to be in that space, but the other one is clearly very upset with him still. So I thought this was just such a sound piece of advice. And it also really, really highlights how Barb can easily be shrinking to both John and Jen. And we see that theme play out. Whether it's a super tiny room, this is a tiny space. Back in Chicky's episode for Chicky's birthday, when Frank says, "You suck up all of the air in the room and then get upset for people not being able to breathe." He's saying essentially, like, you make everybody feel really small. You expect everybody to shrink underneath you. And when they don't, you get really, really upset. I just think that this was just such an important thing that Frank said. And perhaps that's a beginning of a character arc for Frank. Perhaps we'll see him trying to continue to mend those fences. But it's the best piece of advice that I think that he could have given to John, which is be mindful about how you're responding to Barb. She is actively making you shrink and making your world smaller, and it doesn't have to be. And I think that Frank also did a really good job of calling out to John about how Jen can take it, but she doesn't have to. And is that what you want? Do you want to regret not witnessing your sister, the one that you were there for, that you were present for? Do you want to miss this because this woman is actively shrinking your world? Now, I did have one question because we saw on the day that Barb went to the tournament that Frank was actually actively calling her. It wasn't the day of the wedding rehearsal, but when he called her, she didn't respond because Nora told her not to. And then when they were questioned about it, he was really upset that he could not get in contact with her. So I thought this was kind of interesting. She kind of Uno reversed him a little bit because he was acting so coldly to her. And then he's now actively calling her back to back to back. And she knew that was outside of his behavior. It's not something that he did, but he seemed really irritated and upset at the fact that she didn't answer his phone calls. And so it was kind of like, well, Frank, you can't have it both ways, my friend. You can't expect to ignore her, sleep in a completely different room, and then expect her to come at your beck and call whenever you feel like it. I didn't get a follow up as towards why he was calling her so much. So we get to the day of the rehearsal dinner, and this is the day that Barb is saying that she's going to play pickleball, and Frank is like on the rehearsal dinner, and she was like, I can do two things at once, right? And so we see Barb actively dismissing Jen's wedding. Now we are here at the rehearsal dinner. Jen obviously can't talk because of the whitening strips. Shauna says, "You've got to show up for the people that you love," which another running theme in the episode. And then here comes Barb in from the pickleball that she was playing, and obviously she is here late. Now, this is where things start to get interesting, and we start to see Barb's dismissing and trying to shrink everything around her. She's the most important. Her feelings are the most important. So she can easily say, I can do two things at once. I can go to pickleball and come to the wedding. Even though Jen's like, it's gonna, like, what if it runs long? What are you going to do? Like, you shouldn't do two things at once. And then she almost calls Greg Gregor. And this time she's not drunk. So she is so flippant and so dismissive that she forgot that she's supposed to call Greg Greg. Then she has this moment where she says something really offensive. She knows she says something offensive. Greg calls her out. He explains to her why what she said was offensive. And here's another turnaround. We have Barb actively using tactless honesty. So she says, "You had a baby out of wedlocks and then shacked up. These are facts." Really rude. And she's saying this at their rehearsal dinner. That doesn't matter. And she knows it doesn't matter, but she knows that it will hurt them. And this is another thing meant to create obedience in Jen. It is meant to cause Jen to shrink so that she can stop Barb from being mean to her. It will create Jen just actively doing whatever Barb wants, which is to give her attention. Barb also shows up in white. From the rehearsal dinner, we go into the wedding. We see Shauna and Jen getting dressed and getting ready for this wedding. Jen and Shauna exchange a moment, which was really beautiful. And then Shauna steps out and enters Nora and Barb. And this is when Barb is the worst that she could possibly be. So, first of all, I thought it was really interesting that Barb was like, all right, so I'm just not going to shower. Like, girl, you were just running up and down a court and you said that you won the game. You know you is sweaty. Yuck. And Jen is like, you're not going to shower. And this is another thing. It's Jen's fault why Barb can't shower. She doesn't want to run home. Then we see that Barb is wearing black to the wedding. All of these things she's doing on purpose. She literally looked like she was going to a funeral. And then when Jen calls her out, Barb starts to say things like, you've ruined my mood and now you are embarrassing me. I do one thing for myself, and you can't have the decency to be happy for me. You're so entitled. Then she says that thing about, you better hurry up and get to the altar before Greg decides not to marry you. So she was being actively rude to Jen. And I think this is, again, another way of Barb attempting to make things really small, get Jen to a place where she feels small. And Jen has called that out several times. This is another moment where Barb wants all of the attention, so much so that she is willing to hurt others to get her attention. Now, Christine is the best step in friend ever. And I really enjoyed how Christine just kind of stepped in. She put on the charm. She's really good at faking it, something that I don't think I could do well at all. It's all over my face. If I see you like and I don't like you, you gonna know it. It's all over my face. Like, it's really hard for me to fake it with people that I don't enjoy. So Christine was really, really, really good at this. And her getting Barb out of there, getting Nora out of there, we gave space for the big thing to happen, which is the elopement. I thought the elopement was beautiful. This was just such a good way for the family to highlight who they are. And we see the family as a whole. We see Shauna, John, the kids, and Greg, Jennifer, and Frank, and Katie, and Mama D, all in here to witness this. And almost Christine, if she wasn't playing security guard in another life, she could have been there for the elopement. I love that this was the episode where you see like characters really understanding things. Christine was not going to hold this against them. Like, oh man, you owe me, but lock the door. I'm going to get these people calm and then we can get this show on the road. I never really realized until today that Piper calling Greg Egg also fits into the farm factor. So if you saw me play bingo, you know that I was like, a farm is going to be incorporated some way, somehow. I mean, Greg, Egg, Farm, Chicky Blue, like it's all farm. And plus, from Shauna's ordained chicken minister, that being the wedding in itself, the marriage, the ceremony in itself, I think that was like chef's kiss. This is really the highlight of the metaphor of small spaces and not shrinking. You have all of these people in this tiny, tiny room, and they're not shrinking. They're only expanding. They're only becoming a bigger family. And that happens when Barb is out of the picture. That happens when Barb leaves, when they ignore Barb, where they realize that they don't let her shrink them, then they can expand. Then everything's all said and done, and Barb calls more attention to herself. She stands up. I can't do this. She is so into herself that she doesn't even notice that Shauna and John are at the wedding. She was surprised when John was like, Mom, you're doing this in front of 200 people. Sit down. And she was like, John? I can't sit here like I don't matter. She's turning on the waterworks. Barb was so into herself that she didn't even recognize or realize that Jen was wearing her wedding dress. And she initially saw Jen in the dress. So after the wedding happened, Jen had all of the confidence that she needed. And this is when she is able to let Barb know that you no longer bother me. And this is the thing that she doesn't have to nitpick. She had her wedding, she had her elopement, she had everything that she wanted. She doesn't have to nitpick Barb being Barb here. So Jen says things like, it's okay, it's acceptable to cry at the wedding. And what does Barb say? True. Which to me is an indication that Barb is aware that she can have all of these emotions and it's enough to make people question. It's enough to make people take her side, right? It's enough for people to not be embarrassed for her because people cry at weddings. And then Jen says, it turns out that your criticism was an admission. Barb's dress ended up being the dress that fit because Barb was bigger than Jen. She was bigger than Jen when Jen asked for the wedding dress. And maybe the reason why Barb didn't want to share the dress is not just because she had fun at one point in time, but maybe she had recognized that Jen was smaller than her and that the dress really was not going to fit, not because Jen was too big, but because the dress itself was too big. Now, this is a callback because I have said before, we have seen that Barb has some issues had issues with body image. And I think we are seeing that play out. So, her not being able to recognize that Jen was smaller than her, or her consistently commenting on Jen's body, is really a more of an admission of her own discomfort with herself. And in all of this, when Jen is calling out Barb and she's giving her the business, Barb says, why are you being so mean? You could be so mean. And it cycles back to the thing that Nora said to Barb in the restaurant. You can dish it, but you can't take it. All in all, at first, I was expecting for it to be more hard hitting, but I think Shauna did a really good job of just highlighting some really amazing themes here. And this is really an arc for the McAllister family and now the Garrisons, because what we are seeing actively is their ability to expand and no longer shrink their worlds because of the person that Barb is. And just knowing that feels like a bit of a happy ending. It feels like a bit of a turnaround because now we can start to see John and Shauna enjoy themselves in a way that they had not been able to for over a year now. They don't have to constantly and consistently look over their shoulder for Barb because they're no longer going to shrink their world to keep her out of it. Jen was able to have her moment and start her family with a few hiccups, but all in all, how she wanted to. All of that said, let me know your favorite parts of the wedding in the comments below. Let me know what you thought about this episode. And there's more episodes to come in the Shawnaverse, so I will hopefully get you that commentary sooner than later. But until next time, I'm going to see you then. Bye for now.